for garments. And so sometimes when you're weaving fabric for garments, the hardest thing is to finding buttons or jewelry or things that go with what you've woven. And so I know people that have gotten into making buttons, doing jewelry, and so there's all these kind of ancillary things to weaving. Another reason that you get into it is because you just cannot find a good button. So people get into making their own. So yeah, fun.
So I'm going to ask a personal question here.
Go right ahead.
You agreed to be part of Talking Threads. Why?
Well, it's interesting. When you first asked me, it was kind of an ego boost, you know, to be interviewed on television. I've never done anything like that, so that was fun. And I love sharing the idea of weaving and techniques of weaving and anything about weaving. I love sharing that. And this would certainly reach a different audience than I've ever reached before, so I liked that. And then my two grandsons are very impressed with television and movies, and I knew they'd be very impressed with their grandma being on
Do you want to say hello to your grandsons?
Hi, Calvin and Jackson. How are you doing? Okay. So several reasons.
Okay.
It all sounded good.
Well, the fact that Grandma's on television is pretty cool.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
They're gonna be impressed.
So, getting into weaving, what recommendations do you give for someone new who's just starting to get into weaving?
You know, I think the very first thing that you need to do is get involved in the community of weavers. Join your guild. If you don't have a guild, there are online weaving groups. Find people that are weaving. Go to a weaving shop. Go to a conference. Take workshops. Just immerse yourself in it. Get the best loom you can buy. And to me, I think the reason that I got interested and stayed interested in weaving was that I had people that I knew and liked that were also in weaving, and we could feed off each other, we could encourage each other, we could support each other. I used to have friends who would come and help me warp, but
you are so lucky on that one.
They won't do that anymore. They won't do that anymore. But anyway, to me, the beyond the process, I love the process of weaving, and just weave more. Weave as much as you can. Put a warp on and start weaving and get into it. But the idea of being involved in the community of weavers, these are the best people on earth. They will help you. They will, if you have a question, they will help you answer it. It's good. Get involved.
Well, also, guilds will frequently have large lending libraries. So that means you've got additional resources that now become available. Right. And are you seeing that the skill level of weavers is now advancing because of this?
You know, I believe so. I think, like I say, when I first got into weaving several decades ago,
just a while back.
People were weaving on 4-shaft looms. We had a few books. We obviously had enough to get going. We had limited materials. But for now, there are so many books being published. Our guild, I have no idea. We have literally hundreds of books in our library and magazines. We've had magazines like Weavers and Handwoven and magazines that teach weaving theory, magazines that show projects, and all levels. And so that has been a big boost for weaving. But I see people jumping into weaving now. Now that computers are so ubiquitous in our world, a computer is part of your life. I know people of all ages who have computers. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we had maybe 50% of our members had email. Now, I think about 99% of our members have email. So it's everywhere. And so I see people jumping in and seeing the logic of a computer interface loom, where before it was like, oh my, what is that? That maybe isn't even weaving. And now it's, oh yeah, this gives me design freedom. I'm familiar with computers. There's great software. And so you see people jumping in. at any level in weaving now. It's all open. It's open to wherever whatever interests you, whatever kind of product you want to make, you can find the loom that will help you do that.
Well, the other thing that's now happening is computer interface looms are becoming much more popular, and the software is advancing at a rather steady pace. What kind of impact has that made on the weaving community?
Well, it certainly improved show and tell at the guilds. we have some, our guild, I mean, I don't know every guild on earth, certainly, and I've been to several guilds because I'll teach at guilds, and so often I'll be at the guild meeting and see what's going on. But for my own guild, we have now probably, 10% of the weavers in the guild have a computer interface loom, and that's pretty huge because I would say, 5 years ago, you might have had 1%, if you had any percent at all, with people in your guild with a computer interface loom. So, and it's like anything else. It's like that whole community of weaving. The more people that have this sort of technology, and the more that you find that it's okay, and you also have the support system. You have the support system to help you. If you're just jumping into this all by yourself out in the middle of nowhere, and you don't have any friends that are doing computer interface weaving, you're on your own. There's not a lot of literature out there. There's not a lot of help. But if you have a community around you that are on that, wanting to weave at that level, wanting to weave with that complexity, you can support each other, and then you can afford to bring in teachers that can teach at that level, and it all mushrooms. And then once the items at show and tell start moving up several notches,
well, then you sit there and you're looking at all of these gorgeous pieces, and you start drooling, kind of like Pavlov's dog. Exactly. So may I ask you to discuss these scarves a little bit?
Well, the scarves that are in front of us here, I just took off the loom as I was walking out the door. And
this one's still damp.
It could very well have been. So I decided, well, it was the perfect example for our show because every one of these scarves was woven on the same warp. I put one long, graded green warp on, and I was able to weave these 5 different patterns, and I still have 2 or 3 yards on the loom that I'm going to be able to weave several more. With the computer interfaced loom, I do all my designing beforehand, and once I have the threading on, I can weave one scarf, stop, change my computer program to another pattern that I've already designed, and start weaving that right away. So these were all woven on the same warp. They're all very different. Each pattern is different. And
you've got butterflies, you've got diamonds, you've got nested feathers, you've got a different type of diamonds, you've got flowers. They're all different.
They're all different, and they're all exciting. I think when you're working at this kind of complex fabric, the pure pleasure of sitting at your loom, throwing the shuttle, and creating this kind of wonderful textile, there's a certain sense of awe to this, that I'm actually creating this. It's almost unbelievable that this simple act results in these wonderful textiles.
Your signature piece, morphing butterflies over there. Okay.
Yeah, the idea of taking well, let me back up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
When you have a loom, like the looms I started with, a treadle, the loom has treadles attached to it. And I push on a treadle, and when I push on that, certain shafts, certain threads raise up, and then I push on another treadle, and other threads come up, and I throw the shuttle in between. And by that organized raising of the threads, a pattern is developed. Well, on an 8-shaft loom, there's a potential of, I think, something over 64,000 possible combinations of lifts just on an 8-shaft loom. Out of those 64,000, you usually get 10 treadles, so you can tie up 10 of your favorites of those 64,000.
That's
not a lot, not a lot.
Not a lot.
So having the computer interface for your loom means that every single time I push on my treadle and lift, the computer has actually made the selection without me having to physically take a cord and tie up a harness that when I treadle is going to lift. The computer is making that selection for me. And so I can virtually every single time I treadle make a different selection of the shafts that are lifting. So I have the full range of that full 64,000 lift combinations. When you get to 16 and 24 shafts, I don't even know what the number is. It's crazy.
The multipliers become infinite.
But they are all available to you at any time in any order as many times as you want to use them. So you can have a design that changes.
Like this one does. From big feathers down at the bottom to just outlines all the way up at the top.
Outlines of feathers. And so you can have a design like we have over here that
goes from butterflies to a heart.
You have a large butterfly, small butterfly, different. It could change in any way. It can change over the whole length of your textile. So I mean, you can make these incredible looking scarves, beautiful table runners, just beautiful textiles that are unique, and it's not something that you can go down to the local store and buy. These are fabrics and textiles that you cannot buy anywhere else. They're unique.
Now, we've got, and I'll show you that later, we've got the Dobby bars and Dobby chain and the cylinder that they attached to, because my loom has now been converted to CompuDobby. And I no longer have to deal with all of the bars and the pegs that go into each one and manually screw those pegs in to create the design that I had wanted. So, Domine pace.
that intermediate step, I mean, from treadle loom, the next step actually was the Dobby loom. And the Dobby loom was the selection, instead of being made by a computer sending an electronic signal to solenoids that it would extend, you would actually set up a series of pegs on a bar, and as those pegs came around, they would engage those shafts, and so then when you treadled, those would lift. Well, you had a lot more than 10 treadles. You could put 100 bars maybe, so you could have 100 different
but you have to screw the peg in for every single one of them, and then you've got to connect all these bars together, so and at some point they become too big and unwieldy to manage if you've got a large, complex design.
Exactly, exactly. And so you get into this complexity, and because you've got weaving software that allows you the design freedom to design pretty much anything you want, you pretty soon realize that, oh my, this is going to take 600 bars and pegs, and I don't know if I want to do that. So that's Yes, exactly. So that's where the computer interface comes in, because at that point, you don't have to worry about the pegs and bars. The computer sends the electronic information to the loom, and so every time you treadle, it lifts what you want it to lift, and none of that putting in the pegs. So a big improvement.
Well, in having for example, the AVL loom, it also has the ability to warp sectionally, which means that you are now needing to invest in a little bit of additional equipment, like the spool rack over there. Would you talk about that?
I can, certainly. AVL certainly isn't the only loom with a sectional warping. Most loom manufacturers have the option of having sectional warping. And in sectional warping, you're warping one small section at a time. And for those of you who know weaving, typically what you'll do is be putting on the entire warp at one time. This way, you're just winding on a small segment at a time, and then repeating that over and over. And we do use the spool rack we'll wind the threads that we need, and let's just say, for an example, that we were going to do a weave that we were using threads that we needed to put on the loom at 24 ends per inch. Well, the most typical section on a sectional warp is a 2-inch section, so that would mean we'd need to have 48 spools of thread that were wound to a certain length, and we would have those all ready to go, and then we would just wind on all 48 threads at once, wind on that section, and then go on, cut that off, and then wind on another section of 48 threads until we had it as wide as we wanted it to. So it's a really wonderful way to put on a very long warp because the threads are always under tension there. You could put on a 150-yard warp that way and it would weave off beautifully. So yeah, sectional warping then means that you can put on longer warps, and when you have the design potential to change easily and quickly from one design to another distinct design, you can put on a really long warp, weave off dozens of whatever it is you're making, yards of fabric, scarves, placemats, whatever it is you're doing, you can weave off things that are the same and reproduce that, or if you want to change, you could easily change. So you have all this option. I find that I'm putting on longer and longer warps just because I'll get to the end of a 25-yard warp and go, oh, I wish I had a few more yards. I have several more ideas here that I'd like to weave before I have to put on another warp. So it just, again, because you have the design freedom, it's nice to have a loom that will take a nice long warp, and sectional warping is the way to do it.
Out of curiosity, how many yards can go on an AVL all at one time?
Oh, well, it would depend on the grist of the thread. I mean, if it were really heavy thread, there would be a limit. But a fairly fine thread, something that we were using like our 10-2 that we were using in our project, you could easily put on 150 yards and weave it off from one end to the next. That fabric would be the same. You could weave a bolt of fabric that would be the same from the beginning to the end because those looms are made to be production looms. They're made to weave at a standard and weave the same quality from beginning to end. There are many looms, and there are looms that are not computer interface, and there are looms that do have a computer interface that are not AVL looms. And there are lots of really good looms out there. One of the features that AVL has is the fact that it is designed to produce consistent fabric over a long length of fabric. And as a production weavers really appreciate that. Because they're selling their product and they want them all to have a certain quality level, and they don't want, if they're having a bad day, they don't want their material to go down.
Still got to look terrific.
Still got to look good. So, but a weaver that's not a production weaver can take advantage of those features
and use the loom.
Yes.
And benefit from the fact that it is production.
Those features, even if you're not a production weaver. I'm certainly not a production weaver. I'm not a professional weaver. I weave for my own